Irashaimase! Hello and welcome to Fataris' Kitchen. I'm your host, Chef Fataris. It's time once again for Shoot 'em Up Saturday, and on the menu this week we have Mad Shark, a classic vertical scroller. What kind of taste will it have? Let's get cooking and find out. From developer Aruma, Mad Shark released to arcades in 1993. Then, in August of 2023, it released for the PlayStation 4 and the Nintendo Switch, which is the version we're looking at today, as part of Hamster's Arcade Archives collection. So, this title is definitely on the obscure side. It's very similar to another early 90s vertical scroller, Raiden. So, if that's the kind of gameplay you like, this one might be worth checking out. But do keep in mind, this is very much your run-of-the-mill standard vertical scroller. So, depending on whether you like that era of gaming or not, this one may or may not be for you. With that said, we'll dive in and you can make your opinion off of what you see. So, starting the game, we're going to be playing this two-player today, as it does support two players simultaneous. But initially, when you put the credits in, the second player does have to wait, but we have this neat little launch sequence. It is a bit weird, because you've got that secret hangar, but then there's a very obvious runway. That said, there's no real story given, so I can't really tell you what's going on. So initially we've got the two fighters. The player one is the usual red, player two is blue, and we've got two main methods of attack: our shot and our bomb, and that's basically all that's there. There is possible to swap between three different weapons. You start with the missile, which is your default shot. Then there happens to go and be the Vulcan, which ultimately, as you level it up, will go to spread. And lastly, there's the laser. The Vulcan, actually all the weapons upgrade to level 7, so they can become quite powerful. However, when you die, you are reset back to base power with only a single power-up dropping for you to replenish your power. There are other pickups that we can potentially get. There's extra bombs that we can pick up. There's these coins on the ground. The coins are really weird. They vary in value randomly from 100 all the way up to 10,000. So points in this game can be extremely random depending on just your roll of the dice. There's also additional bombs that we can pick up. And lastly, there's also a very special P power-up, which will take your current weapon all the way to full power. The first stage itself, especially with two players, is quite the cakewalk. We're already done with that. And then we have our end stage transition, where we have this supply truck come up, we get our scores, and you're scored additional points for both bombs and the coins you picked up throughout the course of the stage. And that's basically what we have here for Mad Shark. As I mentioned, it is definitely your standard vertical scroller. But some of the things I can go and say is I do really like some of the animation that the game has, especially in the city scenes, as well as once we hit later in the game, there's a section where we transition to fighting in space. A bit of a spoiler, but depending on if you're familiar with Raiden, that one might not have come as too much of a surprise. But you've got some great mech design, and one thing that I really appreciate is that it transitions from one style to another when we hit outer space. So the carriers that we are getting our power-ups from when we're on the planet itself change fairly substantially in design once we hit that space section, and it's just a nice touch like that I can really appreciate. There's other animations in the city sections. You see cars driving around, birds flying, and also just the enemy design is something that I really enjoy as well. So for the enemies, the main tanks and those boats, the turrets kind of remind me is almost a little bit cartoonish, where I'm reminded of titles say Advanced Wars, with the way that the enemies look, and it's just a fun thing to see overall. Let's go ahead and transition to a different weapon. So this is, well, was more powered version of our original main shot, the laser. So, or sorry, the missile. We can talk a little bit about the one of the issues the game does have. So, like when you're moving left and right, you can scroll the screen, and the problem is when you're scrolling, you can scroll on enemies that are on the screen, but when they're off, they can't target you. Well, as soon as they're scrolled onto the screen, they can. And so one of the things I feel you want to do with this title is really control the scroll of the screen so you're not scrolling on enemies unwanted, as like ultimately that can be very bad for your character. In addition, another thing that I want to talk about is when you are playing the game single player, it has checkpoints. So if you happen to lose lives, then you're have to go step back to that checkpoint. And for some of the checkpoints, it's actually quite a step back from where you're at in the stage. So as far as the minus flavors are concerned, those are two of the big ones. The scrolling of the stage, bringing on unwanted enemies. If you're playing the game two-player, you can kind of control that a little bit by having one player kind of like sit on one side of the screen or the other, and then having your main attacker be the player that's not holding the scroll. And then we've also got just a problem, well, this one's not really a problem, more of a personal preference on my end, but I just feel like the music is relatively uninspired. You're always fighting with the same boss theme, and throughout the course of the gameplay, the stages themselves like don't have like necessarily the greatest of sound designs. Oh, here's one of those P power-ups for full power-up. As you can see, the Vulcan shot becomes a really awesome spread when it hits that point. But as far as the plus flavors are concerned, so as I mentioned, I just really like think the design of the enemies is actually surprisingly like cute. Like just the way that like these enemy tanks look, and like the carriers, the ships themselves, like all the various like animations that we get in some of the sections of the gameplay. Even if it's a little bit like rudimentary, it's still one that I've enjoyed having the opportunity to experience. I just kind of wish it didn't have like the checkpoints that are kind of the bane of like so many early 90s like shoot 'em ups. So ultimately, this is a title that I can recommend if you're interested in like this kind of vertical scroller from that era. But for the most part, only those that enjoy this kind of thing, I think, are gonna like really be able to sit down and enjoy this particular gameplay. Alright, that'll just about wrap it up for this week's episode of Shoot 'em Up Saturday. As always, I want to thank you so much for joining us. I hope you have a wonderful week yourself, and look forward to seeing you again next time.